PJNet.TV. It is 9:01 on the East Coast. We have Ben Cooper standing by. We are running a bumper and we are ready to switch to Studio 6 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, good evening. Welcome to PJNet.TV. It is Tuesday evening, about 9 o'clock or so. And we are awful glad that you have taken your time to join us. If you're here in the PJNet.TV chat room, I see some weird things going on there with profile pictures. I don't know what that's about. And we have all kind of weird things going on tonight. For example, behind me you see this cluster of, well, you may not know what that is, but I do, and more importantly, Ben Cooper does. Now, Ben Cooper is actually standing by, but we are having some issues. So he is listening to me by way of telephone, and I am listening to him by way of our usual connection. So let's see what happens if we make this work this way. Ben, I see your you have company.
I do have company. I've got several thousand of mostly females behind me. There's a few males in there, but I brought some bees along.
Thousands of bees behind you, and now you, the beekeeper, probably are accustomed to that. How does everybody else in the household feel about this?
For the most part, two of my kids are deathly afraid of them. My wife tolerates them, and one of my kids, one of my middle son, he could take them or leave them, and I've got one that probably would help me, but he doesn't live in the house anymore, so it's pretty much a one-man show.
Well, you say your wife puts up with, did you say that she puts up with the bees or she puts up with you?
Yes.
I see. Okay, yeah. There are similar things like that in my household, okay? That's why I have my man cave, which I'm occupying.
I have my bee barn, and it's down over the hill, so I do most of that.
And I keep my boy toys in my man cave, and you bring your toys in the home with you.
Sometimes.
Tell us about
hear them, but I can hear behind me. I can hear the bees. The screen side for them to get air is on the opposite side, and the view for the observation hive is there for those that are watching.
That picture that we saw earlier, that heart-shaped cluster. What's going on with that?
Last year, I had a beehive late summer swarm, and they went over to my neighbor's yard. A property line tree happened to be a sycamore tree that had a crack or a hole in it, and they filtered in and went into there and spent the winter inside of that tree. And so I told my wife, I think Friday, down below this steep hillside is a flat field, man-made field that's perfectly flat, and my wife and daughter sometimes walk and exercise down in that field. And I said, if you happen to see anything strange going on, they may swarm out of there. So Saturday morning, she told me there was a swarm in an apple tree. I went to go look for it and saw it. And when I went back to my barn, my bee cave, she came back and she said there's some activity going on down below that bee tree. So I went down there, and that swarm was actually starting to cluster in two different places, and it ended up being about 18 inches off the ground. And that picture is actually the swarm is hanging by gravity the right way. The trees are growing crooked, but the hillside is probably a 1-to-1 slope, and so the soil is giving away where I'm working, but that was a pretty easy catch of about 5 pounds of bees. So the next question would probably be, how many bees are in a pound? And there's usually about 3,500 bees in a pound. So I estimated that heart-shaped swarm to be about 18 to 20,000 bees in that cluster.
Next time I get a pound of bees, I'll count them, and we'll see how your acuity is on the counting of the bees. But what is going on? You're showing all these clusters, swarms. Is this a seasonal thing, or?
Yes, and it would be just like, for example, JD has calving season that might typically run for 6 weeks, where the first one's born and then the last one's born, and just like he goes out and checks his cattle and looks for things and see if there's any activity. That actually happens in beekeeping as well. I go out and check my hives when it's above 65 degrees, where it's safe for me to get into them, and I'm not killing off brood, uncapped eggs or larvae. And if I pull them out when it's a day like today that was just maybe a little over 50 degrees, I'm going to chill that brood that's uncapped, and they'll probably die, and they have to clean them out. So you got to watch temperature. You've got to keep an eye on everything, and then you walk around your property and make sure that you listen for bees, and you look for these dark clumps hanging off of trees that never was there before. So it's about 6 weeks here. It'll run through the month of May. It started a couple weeks ago, and it'll run through the month of May, and you can have some throughout the summer as well. But they are actually reproducing. That's how they reproduce. The old resident queen decides to leave because they've outgrown their space, and she gets sometimes half, sometimes a percentage of them, but roughly half of them will leave with her and in search of another cavity to start a new colony. And they leave behind a queen cell. In this, I have a pointer. You can't see this. There's so many bees, but in this area is actually a queen cell that looks like a peanut shell. It's covered by too many bees. But in this is the brood chamber.
Give them a little tap. Square.
Well, I could, but all you're going to do is that's what kids want to do at the fair. But up here is the pantry. This is capped honey. The bees are working on capped honey that they've been bringing in. This is open honey with fluid in it. It hasn't been capped. Bees will cap off honey at 16% moisture, and they fan it and basically bring that moisture content down to 16%. When it's capped, it will last forever. It will last forever.
It won't. It doesn't ferment. It doesn't spoil. It doesn't.
Correct. This open honey will ferment, but the capped honey will not. So.
Oh, okay, right.
Bees are mathletes, so they know a lot of numbers. They know a lot of fractions. There's a special space here that is called bee space, that they leave bee space so they can get in and out. The queen cell that, I'm sorry that you can't see that. I could tap on it, but it isn't. I'm going to try something, and you'll have to tell me since I cannot see. I have a light on the back side of my... Does that help any from your end?
Well, it's still black at the bottom, but yeah, it helps me see the top. But
yeah, you can see the honey that's capped off and the space in there.
So you're telling me that these bees maintain their ingress and egress. I mean, I see the space along the bottom, and there seems to be a space running along the right side. And you're saying that this is the labyrinth that they make out of their own anatomy.
Correct. They know bee space is what their head goes through. I put this jar. This is.
Oh, I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
This is honeycomb that was filled with honey, and you can see their travel lane.
I'll be done.
That is designed. They did this on their own. When I put a sheet of foundation in, they will do that all based on what my guidelines are, so I can remove that frame. In here, this is all done however they wanted to engineer it. And so you can see their travel lanes or their bee spaces left so they can move and, as you said, the ebb and flow, if you will, of bees. So they do that. They have to have bee space so they can work around and move around each other. On a good hive here in the Northeast, probably about mid-June to July 4th. One of my hives will have 50 to 60,000, if not more, bees in it. And that's just one queen. And she will lay up here about 1,200 eggs every day. So she will lay almost one side of a frame every day. The odd thing is that she only mates within about the first 2 weeks of her life. Then her cervix closes and she cannot mate anymore. And so she mates and she has basically all the sperm stored up in her spermaceca.
Okay.
And this is one of the most amazing things why it's so much one of the most studied creatures on the planet from all time. I think last year, the end of the year, scientists named the honeybee as the most important creature on the planet. I would say that according to the Bible, we are a little bit higher than those bees, but I don't want to put animals above humans. But they are very important. But the honeybee queen goes through and she actually uses her front legs and her head and checks every hive out, every cell out, and she says, is it clean enough? It's kind of like an airplane pilot that goes through the checklist. Everything running. It's kind of like Coach that before we go on the air, he says tape's running, we're recording,
Right.
Everything's working. The queen does that with each individual cell. And so she checks it. If it's not clean enough, she won't lay an egg in it. She goes head first in, checks it out, then she backs out. If it's okay, she measures it like a feeler gauge, and then she will back in, depending on the depth and the size, the width and the depth of that cell. She's one of the very few creatures on the planet that will determines whether she lays a male or a female based on the size of the cell. Isn't
Ben,
that pretty amazing?
I'm blown away. If I could get you to move a little bit closer, because the broadcast is actually trimmed a little bit, move over that way. Well, closer is fine too, but you're actually too far over to one side. Nonetheless, be that as it may.
So the queen actually determines the sex of her offspring.
That's unbelievable.
Humans can't do that. One of the biggest nemesis of the honeybee is the varroa mite, Varroa destructor. It's similar to a tick to us, but it's a small mite that attaches to the bee or actually goes into the cells when the egg is laid. And to go back to the way that egg is laid, there's a sac that is filled with the spermaceca, holds the sperm, and then she has ovaries. So if you imagine the shape of a Y, she squeezes a muscle to release an egg, and she then, if the cell is the right size, she will release a sperm, and that fertilization takes place inside of her, and she lays a fertile egg. That becomes a worker. If she only lays squeezes the muscle for her ovary, it only lays an infertile egg, and that will be a male or a drone. But the mite does the same thing. The mite will actually crawl into, on day 8, all the cells are capped over, whether it's a queen, a drone, or a worker. And the mites are able to pick up on the pheromone of that larva that puts out, I'm almost 8 days old, come start capping me over. And so a female mite will go in, lay an egg, and it's always a male. She then mates with her male son, and that's important because she mates with her male son and then has offspring, and they feed on that larva. Drones take an extra few days for gestation, if you will. For a queen, it takes 16 days from egg laying to hatching. A worker, it takes 21 days, just like a chicken, and a drone takes 23 days. that 23 days, the mites will migrate to drone larvae because they can get two mating cycles out in drones. So as a beekeeper, I look at my drone comb and tear that apart and look for mites, and I can tell, just like if somebody's looking for alfalfa leafhopper or weevil or something in their crop, and that's an indicator that I need to do something about the mites. But the mite treats her, the mama mite mates with her son. That's important because Purdue has found out that the honeybee they will start chewing. They have a chewing trait or tendency, some of them, that will chew the legs off the mites. And when they bite the leg off, it bleeds to death. Coach, you've heard of hemophilia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where does that exist in humans in history?
I want to say back in the days of Louis the Fourth, or he of course he had everything.
Right.
Or Henry the Eighth. I'm sorry.
It was in royalty.
Mm-hmm.
It was in royalty, especially in Europe, where this cousin married this cousin because they wanted power and they wanted land. But what happened to that offspring of these two cousins, too closely related, marrying? They got hemophilia, which is commonly known as bleeder's disease.
Right.
So now the bees have picked up this trait. They bite the mites' legs, or ankles, as we call them. Some call them ankle biters or mite biters, or chewing tendency. And they actually are breeding and raising queens that give a higher percentage of this mite biting trait. And they're are taking care of some of the mite problems themselves.
Question, Ben. We're about 3 minutes out.
Okay.
I'm very fascinated by this because, first of all, it amazes me, as you mentioned, in the animal kingdom, God put man at the top of the food chain in His own image.
Right.
But how do these bees are incredibly smart? Where did they get that smart? Is my question. They don't have school systems like we do. They can't. We have a highly developed sense of communication, so we can impart knowledge to one another. How do bees get this smart?
Up until probably the most recent upgrades to computers, bees could calculate and think and communicate quicker than we could send a text message. A scout goes out and finds a flower. And to wrap this up in the last few minutes, to bring some scripture into mind, one of the very unique traits in what I write about in my book is called this floral constancy. When a scout goes and finds a flower, let's say it's down your way, it would be fireweed. You're familiar with fireweed?
We probably call it something else down here, but
well, that's what they call, beekeepers down in Florida call it fireweed, but or a citrus tree. That scout finds a nectar source. It's a citrus tree, and it comes back with that nectar in its mouth. It then does a waggle dance, which is a series of figure eights. It communicates the flower color, the flavor of the nectar, how many clicks away that tree is, and it shares that information through its proboscis, mouth to mouth, and the movements. And those that it can draw attention to pick up their marching orders, if you will, and know exactly within 3 miles they can fly out of that hive and go get the flower that scout told them about and fly back.
The exact same flower.
They will not go to another tree. Up here, right now, they're hitting dandelions, they're hitting apple blossoms, but a bee doesn't go from an apple tree to a dandelion. It only goes to an apple tree until that source is tapped, and then it gets new information. They follow the rule book to a T. If they don't, the hive will crash. So their communication from begins at a young age. A week old, they get their training wheels, so to speak, and all of them that were hatched a week ago fly and do an orientation flight in front of their hive, and they GPS the location of their hive to where I, as a beekeeper, could take them 2 miles away, release them, and they will fly back like a homing pigeon.
Amazing. Ben, this little display you have appears to have a handle on the top as if it's portable.
Yes, this is what I take to schools and
That's where I was going. Ben, I wish somebody like you would have come into our biology class and explain not only the biology, but the miraculous creation. I mean, this cannot be evolution would be dumbfounded to explain all this. No.
Right. And the floral constancy is just one of the things that solidifies the Bible. In Psalm 81, to end with, we're probably out of time, but in Psalm 81, the last verse in Psalm 81 tells us, "But he would feed you with the finest of wheat, and with honey from a rock, I will satisfy you." And to give you something to think about, where do you get honey from a rock? It doesn't happen. But over in the Middle East, they actually form their hives in caves.
Mm-hmm.
But from a spiritual aspect, some of the hardest places in our life, let's say a death of a loved one, or cancer like I've gone through, or losing somebody to the coronavirus, where do Christians learn and basically get the most out of God?
Right.
Is during the hard times.
Hard times.
You've got the hardest known substance, which is a rock, and the sweetest known substance on the planet, which is honey. And God brings them together in Psalm 81, the last verse, that says you're going to get honey from a rock. That to me speaks that the trials that come in our life are for our good and for God's glory.
Wow. Ben, you're a good man. And I've learned a lot. It's going to take me a while to process this. We've got to go, but I had to ask you this question. Do you have any knowledge of this murder hornet thing that we're seeing come up?
Yeah, it's nothing new to me as a beekeeper. Actually, last year I got information. There's only 2 cases in Washington. Somebody said, "Oh, I've seen these in other states." There's only 2 cases in Washington state, and they're strictly under observation. They're trying to get rid of them. They give this name. A name was given to them by researchers in Japan, but I'll just say a lot of things from Asia we probably don't need here, like the coronavirus. Did I say that? But they actually killed the honeybee larva, but they will snap honeybees in half. But the honeybees have built out a way to resist them. They will actually coat these big giant hornets and Asian hornets to the point where they raise their temperature so high that they cook them, and they will kill them because of heat. And so they're trying to keep them. There's only 2 cases in Washington State.
I just had a feeling you'd know. Let's talk some more about this. Ben, we're out of time, and Dell's coming up. Ben, thank you so much. You have blessed us, and your knowledge and expertise and spiritual wisdom from just observing God's creation is a blessing to all of us. And sorry we had some technical problems tonight, bud.
That's okay, Coach. It worked.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Folks, what a blessing. What a team we have here. I mean, we got I was going to say the birds and the bees, but nonetheless. Okay, listen. We ran a little bit late on that. Dell Didway will be here at the bottom of the hour, and he's going to tell us about his professional soccer. Anyway, it's going to be good. I hope that you will join us for that. And I have to leave to get ready for that. So what I'll do is leave you with 2 questions. First, I hope the studio works when we get back. Question 1, what is the boldest thing you've ever done for Jesus Christ? Okay. Question 2, when was that? You see, the challenge that I present myself, I hope you'll take it up too, is to never be satisfied with either.